guides in natural history and guiding. Please allow me the pleasure and the honor of introducing our new member who's doing a program for us today, Phil Bennett.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you, President Peter. I'm really happy to be presenting to you. I wish that I was presenting from this scene in the African bush, but I'm afraid I'm not. Well, like everybody, I'm sheltering in place here in Oakland. I was due to give you a presentation in person at our California ballroom meetings a couple of weeks ago, but now we find ourselves all between four walls. I did feel when I was asked to do this virtual meeting that my usual conservation talk might be a little bit heavy for our mood at the moment, and I do feel like it's better powerful in person. So today I feel like it would be a nice time to give you a talk about a few fun tales from the bush and try and take you out from your four walls and, at least in your mind's eye, into some open spaces. So to set the scene, hopefully my presentation is working and you can see this. To set the scene, somewhere in the middle of Africa, a river runs through a vast wilderness area. This is the Klaseri River that runs through the Greater Kruger National Park. On the banks of this river is a little tourist camp, very small little camp, rustic tents, and here I worked for a company called Transfrontiers Wildlife Walking Safaris. 6 little tents up on decks nestled under a grove of jackalberry ebony trees on the riverbank. And it was here I worked alongside my friends and colleagues. I worked with 3 ladies who were our chef cum room hands, and the man on the right of the screen here is Isaac, and Isaac is a tracker. He's been a tracker all his life. In fact, at the age of 10, Isaac could identify every one of his father's 50+ cattle individually by their tracks in the dirt. And he was my first teacher in what is the art, and it really is an art of tracking. And we would head out on a vehicle. In the afternoons, we would usually walk in the morning, but in the afternoons we'd head out on a vehicle like this. You can see on the front, on the hood there's a tracker seat. This person on the front is not a guest, she's a fellow guide. And we would head out in search of lions and hyenas. This one tried to take a chunk out of my foot, but I didn't let him. And we would look for rhinos and leopards and elephants, and we'd be able to view them. In the mornings, we'd head out for walks, 3 or 4 hour walks, or maybe even 5 hours if we found some fresh tracks of lion or rhino, and we'd follow the tracks and see if we could find them. And here we're watching a group of Southern Plains giraffe. And so this is the scene for a few little stories. And this story is about Phindile and the baboons. Phindile was one of the ladies that worked in our camp as a chef and a camp hand. And when setting up this presentation, I went through all my photos, and I've got hundreds of thousands, to try and find a picture of Phindile. And I can't find a single one, which is a shame because she's one of my favorite humans. She's got a beautiful, infectious laugh. In any case, the story starts with myself and Isaac, who you saw before. We were sat around the campfire in the morning, drinking our tea and our coffee. And we'd already woken the guests up, and we were waiting for them to emerge from their tents so that we could head out on a walking safari. Phindile was pottering about, setting the table and putting breakfast out, when a baboon dashed by us at full speed, and under his arm, like a football, he was carrying a Tupperware with our breakfast cereal in it. So he was quickly followed by this swirl of African fabrics, reds and oranges and blues, and this was a fast-moving Phindile in full chase. When the baboon got to the edge of camp, he sat and looked back to see if Phindile was chasing, and she was. She came to a halt in the middle of camp and hopped up and down on one leg and grabbed a shoe from one of her feet, and she threw it at the baboon. She missed by miles, and the baboon just stared dumbly back at her. So she hopped up and down on the other foot, and she grabbed her shoe off her other foot and threw this one at the baboon. Again, he just watched defiantly as his shoe moved by miles. So she was determined, though, as Phindile always was, and she let out a blood-curdling war cry and started chase again. At this point, the whole troop of baboons burst out into alarm calls. Bah, bah, bah. And off Phindile in hot pursuit. So this all happened so quickly. Myself and Isaac were sort of looked at each other aghast with mouths open. And I said, well, we're going to have to follow her and try and find her. We can't leave her out in the bush on her own. So we rallied the guests and told them, look, baboons stole our breakfast and our chefs chased them into the bush. So we have to bundle onto the car, and they got caught up in the excitement of everything. And we bundled onto the car and we drove out of the access road out of camp and in pursuit of Phindile and these baboons. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, we rounded a corner, and in front of us, Phindile was walking down the road, out of breath and a bit winded, but her head held high and triumphant. She had in her hand the empty Tupperware. The baboons had managed to empty it, but she chased those baboons 1.5 miles through the bush with bare feet, and she'd got her Tupperware back. So that's a little story about the determination of Phindile. Now I've got a little story from the same camp again of Les and his stinky old boots. Now sometimes we would run 2 walking safaris at this camp. Myself and Isaac on this occasion were running 1 walking safari with 6 guests, and a private guide had brought with his own tracker, brought a family who were his private guests, and his name was Les, and he came quite often. He was a really nice guy, Les, but he kind of fit a South African stereotype. He was an old white ex-professional hunter South African turned conservationist. A big brash character with a red face from many years drinking whiskey around the campfire. And he always wore very short, inappropriately short khaki shorts, which revealed way too much. And he would have his old kudu, which is a type of antelope, kudu leather boots, which had seen many a year of use. And so we were all in camp together, and it was a full camp. And so unfortunately it meant that myself and Les had to share a tent, a guide's tent. And during the course of the safari, a couple of the guest tent zips had broken. And this usually wasn't a problem. They were on Velcro, so I could just take the whole Velcro zip off, go to my supply and get a new zip and put it back on. But we'd had a run of these zip breakages, and unfortunately we had no new zips. So there's only one thing for it. We had to take the zip from mine and Les's tent and put it on the guest tent. And this meant that we'd have to spend the next couple of nights sleeping in a tent without a zip, with the flaps of the tent flapping open. So that's what we had to do. And that evening, we had dinner and drinks around the campfire. And as was usual, I went to bed fairly early. I was up for a walking safari the next morning, so I had to be switched on. And as was usual for Les, he stayed late around the campfire and would drink as much whiskey as he could as long as guests were around, so we could tell him some stories. And I heard him come back to the tent, and I heard him getting getting ready for bed, and I heard his light went off, so he clearly went to bed. And I suddenly become aware of this awful smell. And I pointed my torch around, and I saw what I expected to see. At the bottom of his bed were his old antelope skin boots. And so I said, Les, I'm really sorry, but your boots stink. You're going to have to put them outside the tent. So he didn't argue. He put them directly outside our open tent flap and outside of the tent. So we drifted off to sleep, and as was usual, I could hear lions calling in the distance. I woke up the next morning, and as was normal, I got up early and earlier than Les, and I went out to the kitchen, and in the growing light on the pathway to the tent, I saw some tracks, and they were lion tracks. And there weren't just one lion's tracks, there were 13 lions tracks. The whole pride of the river, about 5 or 6 meters away from our tent, and had taken a path that took them about 3 or 4 meters past our tent. One set of tracks veered away from the pride and came up the pathway of our tent, and it was the tracks of a big male lion. The tracks went all the way up our pathway, and I could see right in front of our tent, a couple of feet away from our tent, 2 big front male lion tracks planted in front of our tent. His head would have been right next to the open flaps of our tent. And I don't know if me and Les were both big snorers, so he might have been attracted by that. I don't think he would have been attracted by the rank smell of Les's boots. But I still actually believe to this day that Les's smelly boots saved our lives that night. And the last little story I'd like to tell you is the antics of a mischievous bull elephant. And on this occasion, I was in camp alone, apart from me and a couple of the ladies. They were doing a deep clean of the kitchen, and I was doing some maintenance of the camp. One of the decks of the tent had become rotten, and I had to bash down the old deck and clear it away, ready to build a new deck. And it was the very farthest tent in camp, and after that tent were a few bushes and about 75 meters worth of bushes and a river crossing where we used a vehicle river crossing, but also a good place for animals to enter and exit the river. And as I was pushing my wheelbarrow up and taking old wheelbarrows full of wood from this area where the tent deck was, and took it back down to the main area of camp and put it into our wood pile, I saw an elephant, a big bull elephant. And he walked out of the riverbed at the river crossing, about 75 meters from where I was working. And he walked into the road and showed no signs of seeing me or noticing me. And he walked behind a big bush and he started to feed. But actually he wasn't feeding. He was using a behavior called distraction behavior. This is a behavior where elephants will very elaborately use their trunks to seem to be feeding. But what they're really doing is distracting from the fact that they are highly aware of what you're doing, and they're trying to decide what to do. And quite often this is a little bit mischievous. So I noticed this and I thought, okay, this elephant I think is maybe going to start playing a game with me and being a bit mischievous. But he was just stood still, 75 meters away behind a bush. So I went about my business. I loaded my wheelbarrow with the wood and took it down to the guest area. And when I did so, I'd come back and I would notice that he was now 10 meters closer behind another bush and stood still feeding. So I could see what was going on here. He was playing a game. This happened 2 or 3 more times. Every time I'd go up, he would be stood still. But every time I went away, he would come closer and hide behind a new bush. So this happened 2 or 3 times until there was only one bush left between where I was working and the elephant, and that was about 20 meters away. So I came back up with my wheelbarrow, and I couldn't see the elephant. He was behind a bush. So I left my wheelbarrow and I walked a little bit closer, but not quite to where I was working. And I took a few side steps out and I craned my neck around the bush and I said, "I see you." And with that, the elephant decided that this was the best time to scare this silly human. And so he came crashing out through behind from the bush with a big trumpet and charged up to about 6 or 7 meters away, kicking dust and trumpeted. But he saw that this human wasn't running away, as he decided. The human stood his ground. And with that, he sort of came to a stop, gave a big head shake, and seeing his game didn't work, he turned tail and quickly stumbled back off into the bush, rather sheepishly. So this is a few tales from the bush, and I'd love to tell you all some more. I've got many more, and I love talking about them. Hopefully next time I'm able to present with my proper conservation talk. I'd like to just leave you with a bit of a serious note. The people in this picture are friends and colleagues of mine in Africa. They also are dealing with the corvid fallout. Their lodges about a week ago closed with short notice because guests couldn't come. And they have had to go home to their villages without the tourism dollars to shelter in place. But sheltering in place for them is a little bit different from us. Some of these villages don't have electricity and therefore don't have running water. They don't have supermarkets, and any supplies have to come 8 hours along dirt roads in public transport, which they shouldn't be using, to come to little shops like this. This morning, I received a video from a friend of mine in East Africa, in Tanzania, in one of these villages where they're sheltering in place. It's rainy season there, and they're having a particularly heavy one. The whole village is flooded, and they're up to their waist in water. So I'd like to thank you all Rotarians for donating to the Rotary Foundation and all our Rotary funds, so that our World Service Committee can help these people. And I'd also like to say that I hope once everything opens up, you will support ecotourism and ethical tourism to help these people to protect the wildlife that we now know is protecting us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. You know, one of the things that Phil and I had talked about, since he is traveling, once this is over, he'll be traveling to Africa again, is that he's going to make connections with Rotary clubs in Africa that we can possibly do in the future global grants. And one of the things that I would love to be able to do myself and have opportunities for other Rotarians is to allow them to actually travel with Phil, have an amazing experience on a safari, and also visit projects and do the kind of work we do. So Phil, in honor of your presentation to us today, we are going to make a donation in your name to the End Polio Now campaign. Why? Because one of our goals is to eradicate polio, and we are this close. And we're all beginning to realize how important it is to eradicate viruses. I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any questions being asked of Phil, so I'm going to go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. We will be here next week, same time, same place. I can't tell you exactly what we're going to be doing because we're working on that as we speak. We will probably need to switch over to YouTube. While Phil was talking, I realized that Facebook is a complete failure, but I can stream very easily to YouTube, so we'll probably switch over. And if anybody, I'd just like to thank you and hope to see you next week. And this meeting of the Rotary Club of Oakland is over.